Senator Blumenthal and I are here to announce this morning some major improvements for protections for travelers, Connecticut travelers, particularly on our nation's airlines. I think all of us probably have a story to tell about a missed flight, missed connection, an unreasonably delayed flight. So for me, I was in Milwaukee at an AG meeting, and that flight was significantly delayed, and that wasn't the airline's fault. So I made a change that I would fly out of Chicago. And everything was fine. I got to Chicago, I got there in time, and then you know the story. The flight was supposed to leave at 6, and then it became 7, it became 8, it became 10, and then somewhere around 10:30, 11, the flight was canceled. And I found out by a gaggle of people around the counter getting very, very agitated. And basically the answer was, sorry, we don't have any answers. I think it was keep checking the app and we'll let you know. But I had to get a hotel room and then get home the next day. And I was lucky because I had the ability to get a hotel room. I had a credit card, I had money, I had people here in the office trying to help me, and not everybody's in that situation. You know, if you're in a place that you don't know anybody and you need to get home and your flight's been canceled and you don't have money for a hotel, or you don't have room on your credit card, or you just don't have the ability to make it happen, you're going to be stuck. The other story I want to share is Eleanor is 18. It's hard to believe she's 18. But before she turned 18, we were visiting schools, and she was meeting me in California, and she was an unaccompanied minor. And after 16, I think you can fly on your own, but you're still an unaccompanied minor. And because of a delay, she missed her connection in Chicago, and she spent the night in the unaccompanied minor's room, which is just a room in the airport with vending machines and like a bench. And I don't have to tell you, did not feel safe for my then 17-year-old to be stuck overnight in O'Hare on a bench in a room full of vending machines. And so many of us have experienced this. Also, the deputy had a horrific story on Friday coming back from Chicago. So for a long time, when Senator Blumenthal was Attorney General, it was tough for us to get action from the airlines. Sometimes we would call, or often we would call, and we would quickly get the stiff arm, right? This is a matter of federal law. It's governed by the Department of Transportation, the U.S. DOT. You're preempted. Thank you, Mr. Attorney General, but go take a hike. Now, sometimes they would still play ball and cooperate. We had an experience with a family that purchased tickets to travel to Arizona in April of 2020 on American Airlines. They were forced to cancel their trip because of the pandemic, and we got the same response. We can't help you. This is US DOT. You're preempted. But actually, we kept pushing, and after repeated calls by the Attorney General's office, they did issue a refund. But it doesn't have to be this way, and it shouldn't be this way, particularly if you have travelers from Connecticut who've done everything right. They've paid their money. They expect to make a connection. They expect to get somewhere on time, either domestically or internationally, and through no fault of their own, the airline blows it, and they're out of luck. So a couple of major developments. Number one, we now, for the first time, have a memorandum of understanding with the Department of Transportation. Thank you to Secretary Buttigieg and Senator Blumenthal for putting pressure on DOT. We now have an agreement where we step in the shoes of US DOT and can investigate complaints about airlines from Connecticut travelers. Now we call, and they cannot say, sorry, we can't talk to you. You're preempted. This is a matter for the US DOT. Now we say, no, we have an agreement with the US DOT where we step in their shoes, we use their authority to investigate and to get the airlines to do the right thing for Connecticut travelers. On cancellations, on unreasonable delays, on hidden fees that they did not expect to pay for. And so if this matures into a live dispute or someone has to take legal action, this MOU says that the DOT will team up with us and work together and vindicate the rights of Connecticut travelers. The second thing I want to highlight is there's now a DOT refund rule. So if you're unreasonably delayed or your flight is canceled, you're entitled to an automatic refund. So for domestic flights, that's a delay of more than 3 hours. For international flights, a delay of more than 6 hours. And also, because we've done a lot together on junk fees, a third rule requires the airlines and ticket agents to disclose all fees up front. And we all know, by the way, that there are major carriers, there are discount airlines. There's a ton of different fees now that they're not entirely clear or that are larded into the true cost of air travel. And now US DOT, working with us, is going to make sure that that is disclosed to people at the outset. A couple more things I want to note. This is just the beginning for us. There's still a lot more to be done. These are important improvements, but not even close to what we all need for travelers to protect people from Connecticut. Some outstanding things we're working on is barring the airlines from selling flights they don't have the personnel to support, that they don't have any intention of fulfilling. We want to stop the airlines from canceling flights or significantly delaying flights and then upselling people for a more expensive flight. We've heard complaints about that. And I want to thank Senator Blumenthal for working with us in our sister states in trying to get a full removal of federal preemption that stands in the way of states asserting our state consumer protection laws to protect Connecticut travelers. So a lot of important movement here that will directly impact Connecticut travelers. If you have an issue with an airline, please reach out to us. We have a new website complaint form URL. It's ct.gov/AG complaints. Is that correct? ct.gov/AG complaints. And with that, I'll turn it over to the OGAG, as I like to say, Senator Blumenthal. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney General Tong. Let me begin where he ended and say there's a lot more to be done. These new rules are a very significant step forward after literally years and years of advocacy from us, complaints from consumers, and essentially mismanagement by the airlines because they have failed to put consumers and passengers first. They have prioritized profits over good service. And one example that the Attorney General gave was essentially they've sold seats on flights without having the personnel to staff those flights. If you don't have the flight attendants and you don't have the pilots, you can't fly the plane. But the airlines have booked flights without planning ahead, and that's one of the reasons why there have been continuing cancellations. Two developments, very important. First of all, this week and next, we're going to be dealing with the reauthorization of the FAA, a significant inflection point because it gives us a chance to send a message to the regulators and the airlines that the status quo won't fly anymore. Consumers deserve relief from the headaches and haggling that has been part of flying for most of our lives, especially recently, because the airlines have really driven to maximize profits post-COVID. And second, we're approaching the summer season. Guess what? There are going to be more people wanting to fly. They're going to be the same number of flights, and that's going to mean airlines are going to be increasing their fees, taking advantage of increased demand without providing more flights. And so we are saying to those airlines, you need to disclose right up front how much it's going to cost. You need to eliminate those junk fees like charges for the second and third bag and for carrying on bags. And most important, you need to guarantee people automatic cash refunds, not vouchers, not credits for some flight in the future that no one knows they're going to take. Cash, automatic, prompt. Disclosure, upfront, what the costs are going to be. Now, these new rules define, for example, as Attorney General Tong said, what an unreasonable delay is. 3 hours or more, that's unreasonable. I spent 2 hours on the runway less than a week ago. I was in a good mood because we just passed the Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan supplemental. It passed at 9 o'clock. At 10 o'clock, I was at the airport on the runway, and there I sat. And we never took off. Now, I didn't have to pay for a hotel because I have a place to stay in Washington. But everybody else on that plane, almost everyone, had to get a hotel. And what we want is refunds automatic for those folks who have to reschedule their flights and their lives. But also, if they cancel flights without a good reason, they ought to pay a penalty. That's not in the new rules, but it is part of the Passenger Bill of Rights that Senator Ed Markey and I have introduced. And I want to just emphasize on the point about how much more we need to do. In my view, part of the most important part of this new regime is giving attorneys general like William Tong the power to enforce. You can have all the great rules in the world, but they're dead letter if you don't have strong enforcement. And that's what Attorney General Tong is going to do because of that letter of understanding that gives him the power to be the cop on the beat. He is going to be an enforcer of federal rules. State attorneys general enforcing federal rules. Absolutely vital. Why? Because DOT at the federal level, for all of their good intentions and rhetoric, often is a toothless tiger. I say that with all respect and admiration for Secretary Buttigieg, but in the past 3+ years, only $164 million in fines have been imposed. That's less than the cost of doing business for the airlines. If they don't have real incentives to do better, they won't do better. And that's why a strong enforcer like William Tong is absolutely necessary. Now, I believe that Secretary Buttigieg wants to impose higher fines and penalties. But here's the dirty little secret about the present law. He is capped $25,000 per incident. There's no incentive for him to enforce those rules when the airlines pay just a pittance in penalties if they break the law. And so the present federal regime of penalties works against effective enforcement. I want to lift the cap so that penalties are unlimited, and I want stronger enforcement of these rules by giving individuals the right to sue, which right now they don't have. So a Passenger Bill of Rights, which Ed Markey and I introduced in the wake of those massive cancellations by Southwest in December of 2022. You remember they grounded flights all across the country. And Secretary Buttigieg said we were going to have a Bill of Rights. I'm saying we need a Bill of Rights, and we need it now, that gives passengers the right to take the law into their own hands and enforce it in court, lifts the penalties for both the federal and state governments, and make sure that we devote the resources that we need to provide for passengers and consumers. This is really important as we approach the summer flying season. People are going to be getting into airplanes They'll be charged more if they want to sit next to their families. They'll be charged more if they want to check an extra piece of baggage. They'll be charged more, nickel and dime. Junk fees have to be stopped. The real way to enforce this law is to give more authority for higher penalties to effective state enforcers like Attorney General Tong and our federal enforcers as well. And that's what we're going to be working on over the coming weeks and months, trying to get this passed over strong industry opposition. I'm sure they have armies of lawyers and lobbyists, but we have passengers on our side. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
What's the status of the passenger bill of rights right now? You just said obviously facing industry opposition, but this has been introduced. There were some other things that just had to get through Congress recently, so been a little busy, but where does this stand right now?
It has been in committee, in the Commerce Committee, and I'm hopeful that we'll have a hearing on it. We have made efforts to add it to the FAA reauthorization, but that bill, as you know, simply reauthorizes the safety agency of the federal government, the FAA, and so I am somewhat doubtful we'll be successful. We're going to continue trying, but also it's in committee now, and we hope and anticipate growing support.
Let me just add and pick up on what Senator Blumenthal said about the summer travel season. We look forward to time with our families, but travel is really a way of life for all of us, not just for summer vacation, but work, school, obviously healthcare emergencies. If you need to see somebody or attend to somebody who needs care, major migration coming now with high school, college graduations, and then kids coming back from school, right? And then young people going out for summer jobs and internships. I mean, that's a ton of cost and a ton of risk for Connecticut travelers.
When's the implementation date? When does it start for these required refunds for the delays? When should people know when that starts that they can expect to get that refund?
The refund rule was finalized, and the MOU has kicked in already, I believe.
Okay.
Is this going to help passengers who, for example, there's a weather issue at the airport, tweed or flooding or whatever, they end up at Bradley, and just recently the flight was waiting for about 3 hours. Is weather going to be a factor here?
So,
whether they get refunded immediately?
so the rule's pretty clear that there's no weather exception here. 3 hours means 3 hours, 6 hours means 6 hours. Now, if you end up taking a flight 3 hours and 5 minutes after your flight was supposed to leave, you may get some consideration for the cost and inconvenience, but you don't get a full refund because you ultimately took a flight. But I think what DOT decided was it was too hard to and too complicated to come up with a rule that accounted for all the vagaries of weather and scheduling. So basically, we're just holding their feet to the fire. If you sell a flight, staff it properly, deliver your product, or pay the customer back.
It's a little bit like a restaurant. If you make a reservation at a restaurant and let's say the power fails and they can't serve meals, the fact that the power fails doesn't give them the right to charge you for the meal that you haven't received. So weather is not their fault, but it doesn't give them the ability to charge you or to say, well, instead of that flight, you get some other flight in the future.
Yeah.
We don't know when it will be that you want to fly someplace where we fly, but it's only good on our airline. That was their policy. And in addition, they said this voucher or this credit is only good for a year or 18 months. So you got to decide to go somewhere that we fly, even though you don't want to go there, in order to get your money back. That won't fly anymore.
Does can't, like, even if it's a weather delay, like, we're gonna lose a bunch of money, we gotta send this flight. What are the potential safety concerns that this might raise?
Well, let me put it this way. I don't think any airline in its right mind or with a straight face would say to you as a passenger, we're going to fly even though we have a mechanical problem with this plane, or even though it's unsafe in this weather, simply because we have to give you a refund when we don't fly. That is the height of absolute arrogance to make that kind of argument, and I can't imagine any airline making that argument. Now, for example, the reason why my flight a week ago, Tuesday, didn't fly was because of some mechanical issue. Well, that's fine. I mean, it's aggravating, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't give me my money back for that flight if I don't want to take that airline. And I didn't the next day. I flew a different airline and got my money back, but it has to be automatic, prompt, no haggling, and cash, not some voucher or credit.
Yeah, airlines do a better job of planning for weather and planning redundancy, right? And having arrangements that can take care of passengers. So actually, a good story is I was stuck in Colorado in a small airport a couple years ago, and because of wind, they couldn't land the plane. And this is a really small airport, so it was an American flight, and subject to antitrust considerations, they actually offered me a flight on JetBlue out of Denver. Now I had to find a way to get to Denver, and I got the last rental car, but they actually worked with me to get me a flight on another carrier. And you know, if we just saw evidence of the airlines were more willing to work with people and to help passengers, maybe this would be a different conversation. But more often than not, that doesn't happen, and more often than not, people are just stranded.
Now, I'll just add one point here, because we're talking about incentives, financial motivations. I'm the chairman of a subcommittee, the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. We have written to the airlines. We've asked them to provide data as to what portion of their total revenue these junk fees constitute, how much money they're making from charges on baggage and all the other fees that they're imposing. We want to know from them whether these kinds of fees are even relevant